The law is in some ways is very ugly. When you get down to the Joe Blow who's on the corner selling cocaine, his trial is not going to be as clean as Martha Stewart's.
So I wanted to become a broadcaster at Voice of America one day. You wonder how that could be achieved by a 9-year-old from China, thousands of miles away, who certainly didn't speak a word of English.
Hopefully you'll be asking yourself the question that we raise in the very title of this exhibition, A Right to the City. Do people have a right to the city?
If military law had a Forrest Gump, his name would be Christopher Nunneveller. Chris has been present for some of the military's biggest legal events in recent history. Abu Ghraib, the Fort Hood shooting, Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. He's worked on them all. And that's just one of the many things you might not know yet about last season's most popular podcast guest.
Chris, the number one question I got coming out of the podcast that we had was, but you didn't tell me anything about him. All they know is that you're a lawyer.
That's all they need to know.
That you're a good lawyer and that you can deliver things in real talk, language people can understand. But tell me more about yourself. How did you become a lawyer? Did you always set out to be a lawyer? Were you that child that dreamed?
No, I was not a child that dreamed to be a lawyer. I was an accidental lawyer. When I graduated from college, I wanted to really do mergers and acquisitions. And I wanted to get my MBA from Wharton, which didn't happen. So I went to law school as an alternative because I figured, number one, if I didn't pass the bar, or if I didn't get a job as an MBA and I passed the bar, I could at least hang out my shingle and defend criminals. It was a job for life. Then I started doing a little bit of corporate law. Ended up being a securities lawyer for a little while. At the same time, I had joined the Army Reserves. And while I was in the reserves, we ended up defending one of the generals in charge of Abu Ghraib, and that was my first exposure to big-time front page of the Washington Post stuff. Shortly after we had finished that, I was mobilized to out of the reserves and on active duty, and I ended up at the Pentagon. And I've been there ever since, in Washington D.C. ever since.
So not only did you not plan on becoming a lawyer, you didn't at all plan on becoming a government lawyer or military lawyer.
No, when I graduated from college, I wanted to go back in the Navy and drive ships. I wanted to be on battleships. That did not happen, unfortunately, much to my dismay.
That Abu Ghraib case was really the first of many high-profile cases. You call them front page, Washington Post type stuff. As you went on to do more and more and more of these cases, as you went on to look at investigations and deal at the highest levels of government and questions of right and wrong, particularly as related to military and government service, did you find that it to be a calling? Did you find it to be something that you were good at? Did you find it to be, again, something that sort of chose you?
It all definitely chose me. Just because the offices I was in, the places I worked, very small staffs, you're all hands on deck and everything happens. I was involved with the Fort Hood shootings, unfortunately. I was involved with WikiLeaks. I was involved with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was involved at the Abu Ghraib incident really affected 10 years of my life. I'm still, in some ways, still tangentially involved as it winds down. So all of those things where I was purely the guy in the room left standing.
And that's interesting because all of those cases are cases that engendered strong feeling. Particularly against those that, although they weren't all criminal matters, at least not the side you were dealing with, strong feelings against those that people would feel were perpetrators or negligent. One of the questions I think a lot of people wonder is, when you represent a client, do you have to like them? Do you have to agree with them?
You should never judge the lawyer by the client for a variety of reasons. One is the lawyer may want to actually represent the client because he believes something is wrong with the case and wants to help fix it. Or he may the client hired him and it was the last person and he felt an obligation to do it. Or he was appointed by the court to do it. So just because the lawyer is representing the client doesn't necessarily mean he agrees with his views.
And in the government, I suppose there's another layer that you can simply be assigned the case, right?
Correct.
Now, when you're assigned the case in a matter like that, how does that work? Is the government your client, or is the person your client?
It depends on the position in which you're in. Best example I can think of is the White House counsel. White House counsel's position, he defends and is responsible to the office of the president, the position. He's not the Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Barack Obama's personal lawyer. He defends the office. If, for example, something happens and the president is not implicated in breaking some law, the president's going to have to hire a personal lawyer to defend him against those personal allegations, those criminal allegations that are made against him, as a person, not as the president.
Can that create conflicts of interest, or can it just create old-fashioned conflicts?
I don't think it creates conflict of interest. That's why you have different lawyers for different purposes. But it does create internal conflict because everybody's got different goals. The White House counsel wants to protect the office of the president to make sure its prestige and its system is protected. The personal lawyers want to make sure that the president, whomever that may be, Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, is protected so they don't go to jail or whatever the particular thing is.
How does that apply, say, to a service member? So, example, I think we'll probably all know someone who served more than we all know a president of the United States. But to kind of put this in a way that we can all understand, you are a military lawyer. You've been assigned a case, or you're providing legal assistance to a service member. Are those hats competing? I mean, at the end of the day, isn't your client the Army or the Navy?
No, the Army, the military in the last 20 years it used to be, like if you remember the TV show JAG, which I really hate to compare things, but it gives an example where one day the JAG offices used to be organized where there were 10 lawyers in the office. One day you were prosecuting, the next day you were defending. That gave appearances of conflicts. You're friends with the other side, why would you want to do that? In the late 1990s, early 2000s, the military went to the Army has something called the Trial Defense Service. They're completely outside the chain of command. The court-martial convening authority, or the general who's in charge of that base, has no say in that particular defense lawyer's performance. He can't tell him what to do. He's just like a regular criminal defense lawyer. His obligation is to the defendant and the defendant alone, operating within the professional responsibility requirements of the bar.
You talk about being an accidental lawyer, about finding yourself after all these years in Washington and government and practicing law in a way that you never imagined, even when you made the decision to go to law school. Tell me something, when you look in the mirror, do you see a lawyer?
Oh, no.
Why not?
I don't know. I just don't see a lawyer, because I think the perception is that lawyers must be in courtrooms. And they're well-dressed and articulate, and I'm both of neither of those.
Do you find then that not being a lawyer in your head makes you better at problem solving, helps you think outside the box?
I think so. Part of what I think makes a good lawyer is being a jack of all trades, master of none, in such that I know just enough to be dangerous to know there's a problem, and say, okay, here's what I think your issues are. We need to go talk to this guy, and this guy to solve these problems.
You bring up an interesting point. In our understanding of the law, for most of us, it comes from pop culture, maybe news, and that does involve a lot of courtroom work, whether we're thinking of Perry Mason and Matlock, or Law and Order, or simply prosecutors in the courtroom steps, high-profile trials. But the law is a very, very diverse and sort of multifaceted. What do you think are the things that maybe those of us who reared on a steady diet of Law and Order might not understand?
That it's all fake.
How so?
The law is in some ways, is very ugly. When you get down to the Joe Blow who's on the corner selling cocaine, his trial is not going to be as clean as Martha Stewart's, where it's pretty and there's lots of stuff. It's going to be ugly. And that actual practice of law in the gutters, in the streets, in the trenches, is much more practical, much more gritty.
When you are working on projects, when you're on a task force, when you're supporting a larger issue that may have or has since gone on to have historical importance or social impact, are you aware of it at the time?
Personally, no. I think there are people who are aware of it and they want to use it for their personal gain, or aware of it and want to make sure the right decision is made. I would argue that's probably the bigger point, is that they are aware of the impact it's going to have and they want to make sure it gets done right. of the stakes that are involved. Don't ask, don't tell was one of them. Everybody wanted to make sure they were on the right side of history on that one. With Abu Ghraib, we wanted to make sure that the answers were gotten, so that the facts were out there, so that everybody understood what actually happened, not what the people who were involved thought happened or wanted to spin it to their defense or whatever. So yes, there is an impact. I'm probably naive enough to not realize the impact of what I'm doing until well after the fact.
Do you ever look back and go, huh?
Yeah, I go back sometimes and go, hey, wait, I was involved in that. And I go, wow, that's more important than I thought it was.
Dottie, thank you for joining us. You're very well known in the circles in Washington, D.C., about the language and the Asian American community, and even some political and community activist circles. But for those in our viewership who don't know you, what's the Dottie Lee story?
The Dottie Lee story is starting from when I was 9, listening to the broadcast of Voice of America in China with my family in Mandarin Chinese. As I listened to the broadcast, a new world opened up to me. As you probably could guess, we didn't really have real news, fake news, if you will, back home.
The original fake news.
The original,
right?
exactly. So I wanted to become a broadcaster at Voice of America one day. You wonder how that could be achieved by a 9-year-old from China, thousands of miles away, who certainly didn't speak a word of English.
Now, was English instruction part of the standard curriculum in China at the time?
Not at 9. Once I entered middle school, I was given an English lesson maybe twice a week, and twice a week for 45 minutes. And I studied very hard. I wanted to make sure I was the best in my class, and I was. Upon graduation from high school, my English test score ranked #1 in my entire province of probably a few 100,000 candidates who all wanted to go to college.
So at 9 years old, you have a passion both for English and for communicating, for speaking the news and sharing with others. And your first step is to learn English. You excel at this, but now you still have to get to the United States. How do you make that happen?
Well, I would say the one thing I can sum up is by God's grace. I went to a dear friend, a professor at a university in my home province, and he listened to my story. He decided to send a recommendation letter to a few schools. One of them was University of Mobile in Mobile, Alabama. Well, I was accepted, and before you knew it, I hopped on the plane and arrived in Mobile, Alabama.
So now that 9-year-old girl in China is working as a journalist in the United States. How did it compare to sort of the lofty ideal you envisioned all those years before in reality?
Thank you for that question. But let me give you 2 parts to this answer. First, I came to the United States to further my education. At University of Mobile, I shared my childhood's dream with my communications professor, Dr. Wolf. And he said to me, Dottie, did you know the man who founded Voice of America lives here in Mobile? And I was very shocked. And so the next question was, would you like to meet him? Absolutely. So some short time later, the president of the university drove me to meet Mr. Gittens. I met him and his wife. Mrs. Gittens took a like in this young lady. She saw some potential in me, and she told me that I should go to Washington after graduation to be enrolled in a national journalism internship program. I didn't think I wanted to do that because I had some plans ahead for my life, but she bought me a ticket. And so I didn't have that choice. And so I did show up in Washington. Through that internship, I applied for another intern opportunity at Voice of America and to get my foot in the door. as I finished that intern program, they offered me a job. So my very first job in America was to realize my childhood dream, working as a broadcaster at Voice of America. Pretty cool, huh?
That's amazing.
When it comes to the Brink, it's usually me who does the inviting. But earlier this year, I received a very special invitation. The Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum invited me to the grand opening of A Right to the City. It's a brand new exhibit that explores the history and heritage of some of Washington, D.C.'s most storied communities. When I was there, I spoke with Dr. Samir Migueli, who curated the exhibit. I asked him to tell me a little bit more about the exhibit and give me, and you, a preview of what visitors would see and the questions they might ask when they visit the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum and A Right to the City.
So here we are at the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. We are marking our 50th anniversary with this exhibition called A Right to the City. In the midst of all the change that's happening in D.C. and the D.C. area, particularly the transformation, rapid transformation of neighborhoods, rapidly growing population, skyrocketing home prices and rents, but also growing inequality, this exhibition is really about understanding more deeply how and why neighborhoods have changed and been transformed in Washington, D.C., but also really uncovers and highlights histories of neighborhood organizing and activism across 6 neighborhoods, covering all 4 quadrants of the city. We have Southwest D.C., Anacostia, Shaw, Chinatown, Brookland, and Adams Morgan. And this project and exhibition has really been about communities. We have spent so much time over the past several years in neighborhoods, in people's homes, documenting their stories. So this exhibition really is about sharing those stories with a broader audience. When you walk through this exhibition, not only will you learn more about maybe your neighborhood's history, but you'll be hearing it from longtime residents in the neighborhood, folks who have helped shape the neighborhood in important ways, and hopefully walk away with a deeper understanding of how and why our city is changing so rapidly now, but also hopefully you'll be asking yourself the question that we raise in the very title of this exhibition, A Right to the City. Do people have a right to the city? And in what ways can people exercise that right to help shape how the city is developing and changing?